Chris Ballard has finally broken his silence on the state of the Indianapolis Colts. And boy, did he have a lot to say. So let's talk about it. Welcome to the Horseshoe Huddle podcast presented by Fan Nation on SI.com. My name is Andrew Moore, and I'm joined here by Drake Wally, my esteemed colleague over at Horseshoe Huddle. Drake, we wait for this moment every offseason where Chris Ballard addresses the media, addresses the fan base on the state of the Indianapolis Colts. And just like he does every year, I think there was a lot of nuggets that we can take from it. But first of all, how are you doing, man? How was your Tuesday after we just talked last night about our Indianapolis Colts?
You know, you have a tale of two completely different press conferences, in my opinion. You have Jeff Saturday, and I actually wrote this in a piece where it's like you think, there's so many questions after so few things were answered. But man, with Ballard, it was almost like there's really nothing that was left to question in a way. He kind of laid it all out there. So it was pretty good to see, and must be reassuring for a lot of Colts fans.
Right. I think it is. I think we're gonna dive into it here. We're gonna talk about multiple things that he said about himself, about the roster, about the head coaching search, about the future quarterback. He really touched on it all. His press conference was a little bit shorter than it normally is. It was only about 40 minutes. I think last year it was around 80 minutes, so it got cut in half. But at the same time, and I've been saying this for years, ever since Chris Ballard started these back in 2018. Every year that Chris Ballard does an end of season press conference, he's different than other GMs because he won't just come out there and give you these politically correct answers or try to tell you what you want to hear. He's there for 15 minutes, then he's off. He sits down, he answers the questions, and if you're listening carefully, he usually does give, I like to call them nuggets. Give some nuggets or give some clues about what the Colts are going to do this offseason. So let's dive right into it. Before we do that, if you haven't already, please go ahead and follow us on all of the things on Facebook, like Horseshoe Huddle, on Twitter, at Colts on FN. Go ahead and give that a follow. On YouTube, go ahead and subscribe. Hit that little bell so you know when Drake and I are going live, because it's a Tuesday night and we are live. So you want to make sure you're here for all of that to join in the conversation. We've already got people in the chat fired up. Wyatt Law, great to see you, buddy. I thought Ballard came across as honest as possible and pretty much diffused what could have been a rowdy presser by his early self-flagellation. That's a great word there. Left me feeling positive about his continuing as GM. StatsMatt says much better presser than Saturday. I think we can all agree on that one there. It definitely was. So we're going to dissect it all here. And Drake, without further ado, let's just get right into it, man.
Let's do it.
Gut reaction, Chris Ballard's end of year presser. Before we dive into the details here, what was your overall feel of the press conference, and how did you feel coming away from this? Did you feel better about the Colts? Did you about the same? Do you feel worse about the outlook? What's going on in your mind, Drake?
I thought I really did love the way, because look, at the end of the day, Irsay has made so many decisions, and if there's one thing I will point out is that our own Scott Kennedy actually mentioned it, is that he fell on the sword. He fell on the sword for the team. He fell on the sword for the performance. It's all on me. I need to do better. It all falls on me. It's my fault. I mean, one after the other, constant blame, which usually you're like, oh, don't be so hard on yourself. He really didn't leave anything to question, and he took responsibility for everything he had the opportunity to in that conference.
Yeah, absolutely. D-Love, good to see you here, buddy. Always love having new listeners come on to the show. My gut reaction was that he was very honest with himself. A lot of people have thought that, and deservedly so, because we haven't heard from Chris Ballard since the night Jeff Saturday was hired as the head coach. And that night he didn't look like he wanted to be there. He looked disappointed. He looked upset about what was going on. But he was very candid. Came out and he said, and I've got the quote right here. He said, "I failed. I'm not going to sit up here and make excuses. I failed a lot of people. Highly disappointed about where we're at, how the season went. I never take lightly what's at stake here. It's not the wins and losses, but people's lives are on the line." I never take that lightly. I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed in where we're at. Ultimately, it falls on my shoulders, and I'm glad. I'm glad he did say that, because from what we heard from Jeff Saturday yesterday, it was a lot of excuses. A lot of, well, I came here in the middle of the season. It was hard for me to really change anything. You don't hire an interim head coach if it's not already bad. Uh, it was a completely different tone. And the thing is too, Ballard's 100% right. This is on his shoulders. This is his roster that he has constructed over the past 6 years. And it feels like the Colts are farther away than ever at some points. Now, I will say there is talent on the roster in various spots, but the head coach's search is ongoing. Still don't have a quarterback, which we'll touch on here later in the show. But I did like how candid he was, and how he did sit there and tried to answer everything as best he can, while at the same time not throwing anybody under the bus. I did notice that as well.
Well, and he also, I thought that he pretty much said, "Look, I'm confident in the awareness of this situation." He really knew, and relayed that back to the questions that he was asked, just how bad it was. And quote, "I'll do what's necessary if we feel the number one pick benefits us." That is a guy who is telling you, I understand what I've been doing and not doing, and I'm going to be changing quite a few tactics that I've, been implementing. And he also took the blame again for Ursay's decisions, which when you take the blame for your boss, I get it. But boy, it was so glaringly obvious those weren't his choices, and he still
Mhm.
took the blame for him. So, in my opinion, what a leader. It looks like he really wants to make some change for the Colts.
Douglas Williams says, "Who will be our next coach?" We're going to talk about some coaches here
Yeah.
at the end, where the Colts currently are in the coaching search, and we always love uh, some praise from Douglas Williams. Good, thanks again, buddy. D Love, you've been rocking with us for a minute, so I'm glad you're finally able to catch us live. Make sure you're active in the chat there. We'll get your comments up there. But Drake, let's talk about what Ballard said about the state of this team. And he did say that the cupboard isn't dry. They do have talent on this roster. He specifically mentioned DeForest Buckner, Grover Stewart, talked about Jonathan Taylor and how special of a player he is. Michael Pittman. There are guys on this roster that the Colts can build around, and they should. But he did mention how, and this is kind of a little bit of the nuggets that I was talking about. He did allude to that he can be stubborn at times, as in regards to his roster building philosophy, and maybe he doesn't go after the premium positions like a quarterback or a left tackle, wide receiver, some of those positions that is needed. You need to have elite guys at those positions in order to win in today's NFL. What did you get from him when he was talking about the overall state of the team?
I agree 100% with what you said. I do also respect the fact that, like you also mentioned, that he was very candid with his struggles with, getting out of his old ways, but he also stood by the argument that, look, it doesn't matter where I'm at in life. I will always believe that the offensive line is where it begins. Like he really wants strong linemen, and he's right. I mean, you see the teams that win Super Bowls, the teams that get deep playoff runs and win their divisions, they protect, or at least they protect well, or halfway decent, not, you know, second in the league in sacks allowed, only to the Denver Broncos, I think. So, you're talking about a guy who admits when he's wrong, but he also is saying, look, I'm not going to change when it comes to the offensive line, and it will be addressed, which he also said, I believed that Pryor and Pinter would be able to be supported by Kelly, Nelson, and Smith. So he also fell on the sword in that regard and took the blame.
Yeah, and I've got the quote right here. So he in regards to his roster construction, he said, "I've got to grow. Like, I'm very stubborn and dogmatic sometimes. I do believe you have to be great up front. That will be on my gravestone. Don't you've got to be good up front." And
It's
we
awesome.
weren't good enough this year. We showed signs that I do think there's potential going forward, but at the end of the day, we weren't good enough, and that's on me. And that's kind of what I was talking about. And you did bring up a very good point. where he talked about that they thought that even if they did take a step back at left tackle and right guard, that Quentin Nelson, Ryan Kelly, and Braden Smith would be able to elevate those guys. And that is on him. And we've been saying it for months that he shouldn't have neglected the left tackle position. Now, they did talk about Bernard Raymond, and we even talked about it last night, how we think Bernard Raymond's coming into his own. Obviously, he needs to get a little bit stronger. He needs to get a little bit bigger, put on some weight. But you saw him come on later in the season. You saw after that New England game, like Chris Ballard said specifically, there was a change in Bernard Raymond, that his mental toughness really grew after that bad game, and you saw him become a decent left tackle for this team, and I think that's only going to grow this offseason. And as we see here, Wyatt Law says, I think Ballard's approach changes for the better this offseason. Failure will do that. I expect far more aggressiveness. I do as well. Stats Matt says that there's talent, but when you don't have a quarterback, it's a waste. 100%
Yeah.
agree right there. D Love, if Ballard focused on the offense like he did the defense, we will be solid for years. Chris Ballard is the best GM available. Keep him, in my opinion. Yeah, Chris Ballard's not going anywhere. If he was going to go anywhere, he would have been gone yesterday, before this press conference would have happened, before the Colts would have put out 5 requests to interview different coordinators. So now, I want to get back to Wyatt Law's point about how he said he expects more aggressiveness. I do expect him to be more aggressive in certain aspects. I don't think it will be he's going to go out and try to sign every big name free agent that's out there. I don't think he's going to do that, nor do I think that would be a wise decision. But I do think you might see him place a higher premium on those premium positions, like we talked about. He'll probably try to use free agency more as far as filling gaps, instead of relying on talent that's maybe on the bench that the Colts already have, or just kind of focusing, saying we'll plug that hole in the draft, because that might not work sometimes. What do you think, Drake?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like what Wyatt said is, when you fail like that and you watched just how bad. I mean, look, this is no secret. Matt Pryor, he's just not a good left tackle, and I think that the idea was, well, he's got Nelson next to him. Well, that didn't help anything, and it made Nelson look worse. So I think that it's absolutely true that the failure of the 2022 offseason is putting a much larger piece in Ballard's mind that, look, I got $28 million to spend here. There's good free agents out there. I mean, we've had people do pieces on the free agents, and there's good ones out there that could elevate the offense, especially like he did the defense. He had Ngakoue, he had Gilmore. Those are 2 home run hits, and he can do it on the offense too. He's shown that he can do it on the defense. Just flip the side of the ball.
Absolutely. Just got stats. Matt says just got to show he can keep to his word, and that's kind of what I want to talk about next. Is Ballard talking about himself as the general manager and being more aggressive, not being as stubborn and stuck in his ways, saying he needs to grow. We really haven't heard that from Chris Ballard in past years. I mean, he's been defensive of his philosophy, as Taryn said last night. Trust the binder that Chris Ballard has.
Yeah.
But there's sometimes where the binder isn't always right. You can follow that as a guideline, but at the same time, you need to adjust with the times. This isn't 1985 anymore. You don't win by pounding the rock over and over and over again, and winning with a stout interior line, having the best linebackers in the game. No, it's you win outside. You think of the top teams in the AFC. The Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes and his arsenal of weapons, the Bills, Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis. You think of the Cincinnati Bengals with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. That's where the league's going, and specifically, that's where the AFC is going. You got to win the AFC before you think about going on and winning that Super Bowl. So, I guess. What are your thoughts on how he talked about himself as the GM? I know we talked about this a little bit, but do you think that you will see some changes out of him moving forward? And I guess, do you think he can grow? And instead of just putting words to this press conference, do you think we'll actually see some changes?
Oh, absolutely. Because I mean, look, Ballard is he's a professional. First off, this is the first time he's done this. That he's really come out and said, "Look, I sucked." Basically, in short, he said I was terrible, and he even said we earned that fourth pick. He's like, "Didn't we?" He even dropped the f bomb out of frustration,
Mhm.
almost like a
We
sigh.
earned we earned that fourth pick, were his
Yeah,
exact words.
yeah. He dropped the f bomb in a expletive type of thing, and you just saw a different type of Chris Ballard, and in my opinion, I really do think those are genuine words. I think you're going to see some splashes, and boy, now the drama shifts to the coach. I mean, Saturday seemed like he had kind of the privilege, if you will, but then Ballard just blankly said, "Yeah, no." He's like, "This is a completely level playing field." So I
Mhm.
mean, there's just a lot of different things you didn't see in previous conferences from him.
Right. Stats Matt agrees with you, Drake. First time that he's heard him talk like that, and I think he knows he has to change if he wants to stay. I
Yep.
got that feeling as well. I mean, yes, Jim Irsay has backed Chris Ballard, and he is going to get another shot at this, but he's not going to get another 6 years at this. If this thing doesn't turn around within the next couple years, or we don't see improvement even starting next year, I don't know if Chris Ballard is back in 2024. Larrable says that the cool thing about having a horrible season is there's no pressure on the new head coach and quarterback. Just need them to play some football. Can't wait to see it. And hey, Larrable, we're gonna have
Good
a lot of
attitude.
talk about that. It's gonna be a wild offseason. But the offseason is literally 2 days old. And we've had two episodes and so much to talk about already. We can't even catch our breath. So
Yeah.
it's going to be fun. And Drake, to your point here, talking about the coaching search, um, the Colts are already going after quite a few candidates, and Chris Ballard, when he was asked what he's looking for in a coach, and we have to preface that Chris Ballard is the man that's leading this search for the head coach. Jim Irsay is going to be the one that makes the final decision, but Chris Ballard is going to be the one that's ultimately going to put his input into this and really say, look, this is who I believe needs to be our next coach and why. Him and his team are the ones that's going to do the deep dive on this, and then Ursay will either sign off or he won't. So what things do you think are going to be crucial for Chris Ballard? Just kind of going off of what he said today, what are those characteristics going to be like for the next head coach?
Well, going back to him saying, "I'll do what if we take a look at the number one pick and we like what we see, we're going to do everything we can to get that pick." That tells me he wants a guy who can coach a quarterback. That tells me a guy that he wants a guy who can mentor a young stud to get under center and feel comfortable, right out of the gate with potentially a weaker team, because you are picking fourth. That probably means you stink, or you had a pick from before and the Colts did not have the ladder. So he also mentioned when I think someone asked, I can't remember who it was, but someone asked, "What about Matt Ryan? What's happening with Matt Ryan?" He goes, "Not worried about that. First comes the head coach." I mean,
Mm-hmm.
this is without question. Right now, priority number one, the draft is 3 months away. You're going to be drafting that quarterback, definitely a quarterback, based off of who you select as your coach. So, I mean, there's a lot of different dynamics here. So, no wonder he's putting, the head coach as such a high priority, especially after this season.
Right, and I did like this quote that when he was asked about, I mean, we talking about all year basically how Jim Irsay has been running this thing, how Jim Irsay has been the one pulling the strings behind the scenes on everything,
Snapping them
and
too.
and of course, good old Greg Doyle. We can always count on Greg Doyle to ask some out there questions, not be afraid to ask the questions. So one thing he got at was asking if Chris Ballard felt hindered by Jim Irsay over the past few months, as far as if his level of input or control was being was being infringed upon. And Ballard knew exactly what he was talking about. So he said, I'm going to say this about Mr. Irsay. I love working for him. He's a good man. He's a good owner, and he has a lot of experience in this league. We talk about everything, and we don't always agree. If we're agreeing all the time, I'm not doing my job. I think y'all have been around me long enough to know that it just comes out. Like sometimes, even when I don't want it to, it just comes out. I'm going to be honest and tell you what I think. But at the end of the day, it is going to be Jim Irsay that makes this decision. And I think it's going to be imperative. Does Jim Irsay follow what Chris Ballard's recommendation is for the head coach? Or is he just going to say, you know what, I don't care. I want Jeff Saturday to be my next head coach. And that's where things are still like you're walking a tightrope, because you're not exactly sure on what day of the week Jim Irsay is going to be someone that's like, okay, I trust you, Chris Ballard, to take your recommendations. Or is Chris Ballard or is Jim Irsay, excuse me, going to be like, no, I'm going to make this move because I think I'm the smartest man in the room.
Well, I mean, it's going to come down to I think that Ballard is going to make his voice very much known. I mean, look, if you're Ursay, you put this guy in charge of of finding the coach. And he even said, talking about Ballard, he said that, typically with a conversation between me and Ursay or me and Jim, it'll be like, I don't agree with you. And then Jim will say, okay, you know what? We'll agree to disagree. Now let's move on. I mean, like Jim is a guy that doesn't want to sit and hinder and hold and hug an issue where you can't get a decision made. He respects Ballard enough to be like, look, I don't agree with you, but hey, if you really do feel like this is a good choice, I trust you on it. So I do feel like Ballard's input, regardless of what Ursay's feeling, it's gonna mean a little more than when he fired Reich over the phone.
Yeah, I would agree. Stats Matt says Ballard sniffed that question out before it left his mouth.
Oh
I
yeah,
agree. You saw the
stop
smirk.
him.
You saw the smirk on Ballard's face before Doyle was even done. The Colts loyalist says, I'm more worried about Irsay allowing Ballard to fix these problems. It won't happen overnight. Will Irsay have enough patience? And that's a good
Ooh,
question.
yeah.
It really is. I do think that if Chris Ballard is going to fix these problems, that it isn't going to be overnight. The Colts aren't going to be winning a Super Bowl this year. The Colts, or next year, I should say, the Colts aren't probably, I don't even know if they'll compete for a division title next year. At this early stage, and again, we're talking January 10th, a lot can change. But as of right now, if the Colts go 500, I think that would, or 9-8, I think that would be a successful season for them, because you show they'd be getting back on track. You're most likely going to have a rookie quarterback that's getting used to the game. And if you can go 500, I feel like that'd be a success. Wyatt Law says new coach and his staff must provide the prized rookie quarterback with the kind of environment that's conducive to bringing out the kid's best. Should be a top priority that Ballard looks to fill. And with some of the coaches that he has that the Colts have already requested to interview, that's some of their best qualities. Best Stats Matt says still kind of scared because of who Ballard's first choice was last time in Josh McDaniels. But I like that you pointed that out, because if I can find that quote here, and again, there's a lot
A
of
lot of
things that
stuff,
he
man.
said,
Yeah.
but what he said is what he has learned since last time is don't have an end in mind, and that end was Josh McDaniels. So I think he is going to be very open about this. They've requested 2 offensive coordinators and to interview 3 defensive coordinators so far. College coaches are not off the are being considered. As Jay Sanders says, Jim Harbaugh should be the next head coach. I'm sure Jim Harbaugh will get a call. There will be, could be others. Head coaching
Definitely.
experience is not needed necessarily. So it's going to be very interesting, to say the least, because the Colts have already requested for 5. And I could guarantee you there's going to be quite a bit more that they're going to want to talk to and interview before this process is over.
Yeah, and they've Ballard definitely said it's going to be very extensive, very detailed. They've got a plan that it's probably one of those, the It's Sunny in Philadelphia meme where he's like got the cigarette and the war room. That's kind of exactly how they're approaching this. They need to get the right guy, and he even said it's so hard to nail the right guy. And he said that, I think, in reference to the quarterback, if I'm not mistaken, but it's the same exact principle for the coach. of your team. I mean, you saw what happened when you just throw a dude in there that doesn't know what he's doing, complete collapse, and now you have the fourth pick. So they really need to hit a home run here.
Yeah, and let's talk about the quarterback position, because what he said uh was, I think, very telling, that the Colts are drafting a quarterback in April. He talked about how he, like he always says, you can't just take a guy to take a guy. It has to be the right guy. But then he also said, if they believe that there is a franchise saving quarterback or a franchise altering quarterback in this class, that he would move heaven and earth to make sure that they got that guy. So I think over the next few months, you really need to keep that in mind. If the Colts do trade up with the Bears, as Jay Sanders says, as a Bears fan, we'll give our number one pick for the fourth, second round, and future first. We'll have to see about that. But if you do see the Colts jump up to number one, or say they jump up to number three, just to jump the Cardinals and make sure that nobody else trades with the Cardinals, I think you're going to know that the Colts have very strong conviction on this guy, whether it is Bryce Young out of Alabama, CJ Stroud out of Ohio State, Will Levis out of Kentucky. The Colts are going to pick their quarterback in the draft, especially because how over and over again Ballard in this, and he said it more than once. He said, when you're changing quarterbacks every year, it's tough. It's tough on everybody, tough on the team. Not getting that position settled has a little something to do with why the team has been a failure. And it's no indictment on any of the quarterbacks we have, but when you're going from Phillip Rivers to Carson Wentz to Matt Ryan, Sam Hellinger to Nick Foles, it hurts this team. Naheem Hines has said it. Mo Alley Cox has said it. Quentin Nelson has said it, that when you're constantly changing quarterbacks, it's hard to get any continuity. And it's hard for a team to really move forward when the best position, the most important position on the football team, isn't settled.
Well, and you have to think each one of those guys. I know a lot of them are pocket passers, but I mean, each one has a different way of thinking. Each one has a different skill set, strengths, weaknesses. And that's why it's the same principle with linemen. And that's why the Colts had such a great line for so long, as they played together. They understood each other. They knew what tendencies each one and the other had. It's the same with a quarterback. That's why it's just been, I can't imagine what the linemen have had to go through to try to adjust to go from Matt Ryan, who doesn't move a lot, to Nick Foles, who moves even less, to Sam Ellinger, who's like a gnat. I mean, as soon as he gets touched, he's out of the pocket. I mean, you constantly change that, and deep passing as opposed to short passing strengths and stuff like that. That's just complete confusion year after year.
Yeah, and I don't think as of right now the Colts know who they would want to pick. I really don't. That's what these next 4 months are. Yes, they've been doing scouting on these guys for years, but at the same time, there's no, like we talked about. There's no generational prospect. There's no Peyton Manning. There's no Andrew Luck. There's no John Elway in this draft class that is going to be a franchise quarterback for the next 15 years. They're doing their work on every single one of them. The Senior Bowl is coming up here soon. That's going to be really big for a guy like Will Levis. The combine's going to be big. You're seeing that the height and weight measurements for Bryce Young, talking to these guys in the meetings, going to their pro days, being able to get those interviews and those visits with those guys. That's where you determine who you're going to pick and who fits, not only, as Ballard has mentioned, not only who fits what you want physically and on the field, but who fits in the locker room, who fits in the culture, and who is the best quarterback for this team to take them to new heights. So as we wrap up the Ballard talk here, I think overall it was a good press conference for Chris Ballard. And I think the biggest takeaway that I got, or I'll give the three biggest takeaways, and then I want to hear yours, Drake. Biggest takeaway is Ballard knows that he's got to evolve, and he's been honest with himself. Second is they will be taking a quarterback at number 4 or before the number 1 pick. Trade up is not out of the question. And number 3, everything is being evaluated. And I don't think that Chris Ballard is going to leave any stone unturned. And I am talking about with the head coaching search, which if you watched, I want to slip this in there. Jeff Saturday definitely isn't Chris Ballard's pick. So we'll just leave that at that. But as far as the head coaching search, who they're going to take a quarterback, who they might sign in free agency, this is, as I go back to it, the most important offseason for the Colts in 25 years. And Chris Ballard knows that.
Well, and right back to your point, he's going to be more aggressive. He's going to get the guys that are going to help. He's getting everything around the quarterback. You can tell he's already starting to think about the quarterback. So he's going to be more aggressive, I think, in free agency for the offense. Maybe, like you said, not something that's going to go, whoa, like the biggest free agent signing of the season. But I do think he spent some money. I also think that he is going to get other young players on the offense in the draft. I know that that's not a quarterback talk, but I do think he's going to get some other young players around whoever the signal caller is. And number three is that I know that we've seen him be very open, honest, y'all. He's very, genuine. But, you always saw him as kind of a GM that always knew how to hold money. He was very smart, talent evaluator, but you really saw that he loves the team. He really wants to stay with the Colts. And yeah, it's a job. It's high paying, and I get it, but you could see passion. You could hear passion. You could feel, I'm sure, in that room, asking him questions. You could definitely feel it just watching the interview that he definitely wants to stay and he wants to win and turn everything around that he could not promise on.
Right. It's going to be interesting. It really is. And Stats Matt says here, still got to believe Ballard sticks to his guns on his measurable requirement at quarterback anyway. So, yes, they're probably looking for a bigger guy. I wouldn't rule out Bryce Young because Bryce Young has done incredible things on the field, but there's going to be a lot of teams questioning about Bryce Young. So, CJ Stroud or Will Levis are probably the two quarterbacks that are leaders in the clubhouse right now. But again, it is January 10th. A lot can change. We'll just have to see.
Very true.
But like I said, it's going to be interesting. It may not be fun, especially if we're doing an episode the night of Jeff Saturday being announced as the full-time head coach for the Indianapolis Colts. We might have to survey the comments for any foul language and curse words there.
We also might not blame you though if you do have
we might.
Language.
We might throw them up because we'll be thinking.
Oh, there you go.
But Drake, let's awesome. Move on to some coaching talk here. So let's give an update on where the Colts are with their head coaching search in just one day. So the Colts have already reached out to multiple teams as far as requesting interviews for some guys. So I'll run through them. They've requested interviews or to speak with 5 NFL coordinators so far. Lions defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn, Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson, Rams defensive coordinator Raheem Morris, Eagles offensive coordinator Shane Steichen, and Broncos defensive coordinator Ejiro Evero. So all of those candidates are very intriguing to me. Aaron Glenn has a lot of experience in the NFL, but the Lions defense wasn't the greatest. Ben Johnson, on the other hand, a 1-year offensive coordinator, but it's hard to ignore how he turned Jared Goff around and made that Lions offense so explosive. Raheem Morris was the secondary, has helped that secondary with the Rams, has head coaching experience already. Shane Steichen, coming from the Frank Reich, Nick Sirianni coaching tree, but he's also worked with guys like Justin Herbert and Jalen Hurts, and we've seen how they have taken over the league. And then Evero, who led a very stout Broncos defense. I mean, we saw that up close and personal when the Colts played the Broncos. So what stands out to you, Drake, among those candidates? And I'll ask you this, even though it's so early, who is your favorite out of these 5?
Oh, it's without even any second thought, it's Ben Johnson. Yeah, and the main reason is he has a 2-headed attack with the running backs. He's able to get Jared Goff, which, by the way, he hasn't looked this good since he was with Sean McVay. Mm-hmm. And that's just completely true. But he also had Swift and Williams. I believe Williams, I can't be quoted on this, but I think, did he finish the season with the most rushing touchdowns?
Jamal Williams had the most rushing touchdowns, and he broke Barry Sanders' team record for rushing touchdowns in a season. Jamal Williams had a good year under Ben Johnson.
He's not even the starting running back, and he had more touchdowns than Barry Sanders. Now, Jonathan Taylor and Zach Moss, anyone out there with a young quarterback, this is a perfect fit, in my opinion. This guy jumps off the page.
I think Ben Johnson would absolutely be a home run hire. As Majin here, hopefully I'm getting your name right.
Majin Buu.
Majin Buu. There we
Majin
go.
Buu.
I knew that. Majin Buu says if you take a quarterback and you don't land Harbaugh, Ben Johnson should be a strong candidate to develop him. I do like that. Stats Matt, if Jeff Saturday's hired, burn the offices down, like that. Let's take a look here, but in all seriousness, so many great possibilities there, especially when you leak them to people who they could bring along. And that's true, because not only does the head coach have to be a hit, but that head coach also has to assemble a very good staff around this young quarterback, around this defense. If they're not going to bring Gus Bradley and this staff back, that's going to be very crucial. Wyatt Law says the Eagles offensive coordinator has a track record of developing Jalen Hurts. Impressive. And Jay Riddle says Ben Johnson, Shane Steichen, Raheem Morris would be the best pick out of those three. Stats Matt's on the Ben Johnson train, doesn't even know Shane takes an interview, and that's very interesting. I was going to bring that up, because we know how Nick Sirianni feels about the Reich firing and how everything went down there. And Shane Steichen and Nick Sirianni are very close. Shane Steichen knows Frank Reich. Does there's still some bad blood there where Steichen doesn't even want to be considered for the head coaching job for the Colts because of that? We'll have to see. We haven't heard that he's turned it down yet, but that is a possibility. I would say my favorite out of those three, it's hard to pick. I hate giving cop-out answers, but I think I would be ecstatic with either Ben Johnson or Shane Steichen, because in my opinion, what you need out of this head coach is somebody that can develop a young quarterback, which we've seen Shane Steichen be able to do. We saw Ben Johnson, how he helped Jared Goff, or be able to assemble a staff that can develop a young quarterback. But I think either one of those would be absolute home run hires. I love the connections with those guys as far as who they could bring along for an offensive staff as well as a defensive staff, because you look at guys like Shane Steichen, who was with Gus Bradley in Los Angeles with the Chargers. Bradley was the D coordinator there. Steichen was the quarterback coach at the time. You could see what's going on. You could see what I'm kind of getting at there, I should say, as far as that combination. But again, there's going to be more coaching requests. Like I said, Jim Harbaugh is probably going to interview. I'd be shocked if he doesn't. There'll probably be other coaches from the college ranks that might get a look. We could see the Colts even go after maybe somebody like a Ken Dorsey, see if he's interested over in Buffalo. Leslie Frazier, we've talked about. So Ballard said today that they're going to do an extensive search. They're going to take their time, and their main focus is getting it right. Not getting it as quickly as they can, but getting it right. Stats Matt says, still waiting on my Mike Kafka interview to pair with Levis. That would be one hell of a combination. D Love is going to ask, quarterback of your choice and why? We're not going to answer that tonight, because that is going to come later. D Love, you're just going to have to keep coming back.
That's just how these shows work.
As Chris Ballard says, right now, it's the head coaching decision that is all that matters.
That's
We're going to have months of draft talk ahead. But I think that wraps it up for tonight. Again, yeah, I love leaving feet.
Almost got
on
us.
a cliffhanger.
Yeah,
love it. But anyway, thanks everybody for tuning in tonight. Again, we really appreciate you, all the support, everybody in the comments. D Love, sorry, buddy, had to leave you on that cliffhanger.
We'll get that answer, though.
Wyatt Law, Jay Riddle, let's see, Majin Buu, Colts loyalist. I'm going through Jay Sanders, Wyatt Law. I think I already said you, Larrable. You guys are absolutely awesome. And again, if you haven't already, please go ahead and follow us at Horseshoe Huddle. Go ahead and like Horseshoe Huddle on Facebook. Follow at Colts on FN on Twitter. Subscribe and hit that bell on YouTube. Our subscriber numbers have been climbing. Hey, eventually I might give a little challenge. Just says if we get like 1,000 subscribers, maybe I'll before the start of the season, maybe I'll do what Zach Hicks did and I'll shave my head. We'll have to see what happens.
Oh,
Maybe that'll be some fun. But
it's
if
worth
you
it,
have
guys. Do
might
it.
be fun to see. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and follow Drake at D Walster Drake on Twitter. You can follow me at Andrew Moore NFL on Twitter. And guys, we will be back in just 2 days on Thursday night with some special guests. Jake Arthur and Zach Hicks will be joining us to do a Horseshoe Huddle roundtable, and we'll discuss all things Colts. So until then, he's Drake. I'm Andrew. Have a good one.